I actually want to start with you, Representative Phillips. You and the senator have been part of a group of lawmakers focused on addressing what's become known as TxDOT's fiscal cliff. After 2015, funding is expected to severely drop. TxDOT says they need about $4 billion more a year just to maintain current congestion levels. You're in a House with 40 freshmen about, and I'm just wondering now, with 2 months left in the session, do you feel like the full body has an appreciation of TxDOT's financial situation?
You know, I think it's difficult for the new members to understand because oftentimes when we run or come here new and we see all the amount of money in the budget, we say, surely there's money that we can go in and pick out and find. And I hear that quite a bit. It's like, you know, we support more money for transportation because we know that's a role of government. And being a conservative, government should do a few things to do them well, and we think transportation is one of them. And so they see the amount of the budget, and they say, surely there's some money here and some money there that we can go to. And it takes a while for them to go through the budget to see that so much of the budget that we really can go after for transportation is a very small pie. And once you start doing that, you start impacting other things such as you know, things from prison to, you know, the number of troopers we have on the street, border security, many other things. So so no, I don't think that we're quite there yet. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, I think it takes a session or so to even understand that. I mean, the complexity of the budgeting process and how much that we have in our Health and Human Services, Medicaid, that we really don't have a lot of control on. And then also with the education budget, which takes so much and so what's left is what we're fighting for. So I think that education process is still going on.
Well, and Senator Nichols, you had a bill with a hearing just this week that would dedicate sales tax revenue from car sales to transportation projects.
Yes.
You scaled back the bill.
Yes.
Was it because of concerns that some members don't have a full appreciation of the situation?
One of the logic, and Chairman Phillips we filed identical bills in the House and the Senate. And the bill that we had laid out there was to dedicate the vehicle sales tax, but phase it in over a period of years. And the biggest argument against that was that it takes so much out of the general revenue, you know, 8-10 years out there, that it would be difficult to do the budget. And so what I came back and did, I said, okay, let's do a baseline. This is what we did on the severance tax back in 1987, or the legislature did, was established a baseline. And so the year I picked, and the amount I picked was $2.5 billion as a baseline, which was the amount of money in 2010 that the vehicle sales tax brought in, 2.5. Now last year it was $3.3 billion, so there's $800 million above the baseline in the last year. $800 million is kind of a magic number because that's a debt service on Proposition 12 and 14 combined. And so in that, you can also pay for 12. So we did pare it back, but with the estimate the Comptroller's Office had for vehicle sales tax for the next 2 years, so the budget we're working on is about $3.9 billion per year. I think some of us who've looked at the numbers think it might end up closer to 3.5, but either way, that's still almost $1 billion a year, so that's $2 billion that would go to transportation, which is part of it doesn't get you all the way there, but it gets you part of the way there, because what's happening is we're not even staying even, we're actually digging a hole, and if if the legislature will agree to move the bill and allow us to take that, then we at least are not digging a hole, we're staying even, maybe slowly moving up. Doesn't solve the whole problem. It's going to take a number. It's not one silver bullet's not going to do it. It's going to take different pieces. So that is why I scaled the bill back, to try to get the bill moving.
And do you feel like it is moving now? Are you hopeful that it's?
Well, you'll have to ask somebody else that. I think the members, I think, would like to vote for the bill. It would go to the voters. The voters, I believe, would approve that in a heartbeat. It's probably this area of funding is probably the most talked about in the legislature.
And I think that's right. And what he's talking about is we help others move it. We both chair transportation committees. We don't chair the budget committees. And so we have to be advocates for transportation and pushing and saying, what's a long-term source of revenue? And I applaud Senator Nichols. He went around the state talking about why exactly, and I think it'd be great to hear from him again, why exactly it makes sense to go this route. And I do think members like this idea, and I think that with some of his changes, I think I'm hearing that maybe we can get some support from the budget writers, at least on the House side. We'll have to see. You know, I think it's going to be important for us to get the budget done today. And I think within the next week or so, leadership in the Senate and House as it relates to transportation and finance, working with the governor's office, come together. We have plenty of time this session to do something. Some people say, well, we're running out of time. We have such short time left. We've got an eternity, truthfully, in legislative time. I believe we have plenty of time to accomplish something. We may not come out of this session with everything that, you know, the number that we hear Phil Wilson talk about with TxDOT, the $4 billion extra a year we need. And I don't quarrel with that number, but if we can get somewhere, you know, meeting somewhere in there, that's what we need to be focused on. So I do think we have time, but I love to hear Senator Nichols talk about why it's important, compared to the gas tax that we have currently, the problem with it being a declining revenue, and share, because he does such a good job explaining why this is the automobile sales tax is I think a good choice for us to say this is a way we're going to help fund transportation.
I think what the chairman's referring to is if you start fresh and take a chalkboard and you begin laying out core principles, if you're going to create a funding source for transportation, what should it have in it to accomplish the long-term goal of funding transportation? And first on that list is it needs to be a predictable revenue source. So unless TxDOT can reasonably estimate 7, 8, 10, 12 years out of how much revenue they're going to have, they can't begin planning those projects. There's transportation planning involved. Predictability is real important. You know, we have the environmental, the right-of-ways, the engineering, all that kind of thing. So it takes a while to move a transportation project. Second, if it's predictable, it must be constitutionally dedicated. Because if it's not constitutionally dedicated, when we hit those bad years like last session, those monies are going to disappear. It's got to be constitutionally dedicated. It needs to be transportation related. I think the public expects that, and I think the members of the legislature expect that it should be transportation related. It needs to automatically adjust for inflation. And that's where we've kind of really missed it on some of the revenue sources we have now. The fuel tax, 20 cents a gallon, you know, over 20 years ago. And the gasoline's gone from $1 to $3.50, $3.60 or whatever, and it stayed 20 cents a gallon. So it needs to adjust for inflation. Same thing with vehicle registration fees.
Well, actually, I want to stop you there because Senator Williams, who does oversee the budget in the Senate, has come out very strongly for vehicle registration fees, and he's pretty much said he's not too crazy about your idea. And he thinks new revenue is needed, and I think it's every $10 you raise the registration fee, you'd net about $210 million. I'm just wondering, do you think that's, you're not in favor of that approach?
I didn't say that. I think there's a lot of ideas. We need to nourish all the ideas, but I think we need to go back and test them with the principles, because the last principle I was going to say has to do with it needs to be not dependent on the fuel source. In other words, gas tax doesn't work on electric cars. Gasoline or diesel tax doesn't work on we have our heavy truck fleet is going to be slowly converting to natural gas. So it's a totally different type of funding. And so the cents per gallon doesn't work on natural gas. And so I think if you're going to really solve a long-term problem, test it against all those 5 principles.
Well, and so the registration fee, why? Does that not fit that?
I'm focused right now on the vehicle sales tax. And keep working with that, and that's the direction I'm heading. And so we'll see where it goes.
And I don't mind, I'll step into that a little bit. You started the conversation asking about the new members that we have. And I think they're going to be very sensitive to any major increase because, you know, I think we have a bill out there that would increase the registration fee by $30, and that would bring in about $700 million a year, basically. Now, your numbers were higher than that, I think. Well, that was about that.
Yeah.
About that. And so the question is, are we going to be able to get would we be able to get the votes to do that? Would we be able to get the support from the governor's office to do that? And those are those things that we have to work through. But what I hear from folks in this room, out of this room, that until we end diversions, and we're going to have a conversation, and we always have this conversation about diversions, and at times I get frustrated about the conversation of diversions because we say, it's how you define a diversion. And we have a diversion, 20 cents of the gas, as he said, 20 cents of every gallon of gas you buy goes to, that's a state tax. 25% of that by the Constitution, constitutionally dedicated, goes to schools. So it leaves 15 cents goes to Fund 6, is what we call the highway fund, is Fund 6. That 15 cents goes there, and then what do we pay from that? The Constitution says that we're to pay out of that gas tax, after we take the 25% off the top, we use it basically for construction and maintenance of roadways. And the other thing people forget is policing of roadways. And so when we talk about the diversions in this budget, there's going to be about $1,048 million as far as the budget that we're about to go talk about today in the House chamber. That goes to DPS. So then you break back and you say, okay, DPS are using it for policing the roadways. And there's some amount of $300 million a year, or some amount of probably about $300 million or so that is going to border security, drug labs, and other things, which I think that every legislator over there probably supports. And so, but those probably meet the definition of a diversion. So we need to work on that. But I talk about diversion, a question, and you may know this, but when you go pay your $24 every 6 years or so to get your driver's license, do y'all think that money goes to DPS to pay for the clerk behind there? Nope, it goes to mobility fund. So it goes over to Fund 6, then goes out to make mobility fund payments. The mobility fund was set up constitutionally to go out and to help us advance projects, and that's part of the debt that we owe. And that's what goes to pay that's a revenue stream to pay down the mobility bonds or mobility fund debt that we have. When you go register when you go inspect your vehicle inspection fee, somebody has to keep up with that. DPS is charged with responsibility for making sure that people's cars are inspected and that whole process. So when you pay that money, and I did that last week, you pay that, where does that money go to? Does it go to DPS to make sure that it pays for those troopers that go out and audit those things to make sure we don't have fraudulent fraudulent folks out there giving fake inspection fees? And we had a hearing this week, Senator, about fake inspection stickers, so it's kind of on the topic. That money goes to the mobility fund too. There's others money that goes to the mobility fund. So we've got to talk about this. It's more complicated when we talk about diversions, but we have to, I think, take no money from Fund 6 to go to DPS when we leave here, if there's going to be any consideration of anything additional. And some of that conversation may be if we were going to try to find the will to put some additional money, say from a registration fee, if it's not dedicated to reducing that or going towards debt, it's going to be a non-starter.
Let me say, I think it's difficult for a new member, and we have an unusual number of new members this session, to come in, they look at the budget we currently have for and the funding for transportation, they look at the 2-year budget we're voting on, and they look at how many dollars there are for transportation. Kind of hard to look at both of those and say, well, what's the problem? It appears to be a lot of funding. And if you go to the Metroplex, you see all the cranes and the construction going on. If you go to any of the urban areas in the state, there's a lot of transportation construction going on. If you drive 35 between Dallas and Austin, you see construction. So they go, well, what's the problem? How can you tell me there's not money for construction, new projects, when I see all this? And it takes a while for them to understand that traditional revenue sources that we have, fuel tax, both state and federal, vehicle registration fees, that's the primary traditional funding source, no longer even pays for the preservation of the system. It's hard for people to understand that. Those lines cross. The preservation cost will always increase. As the system gets older, every time you add new capacity, you've got to add more revenues for preserving it. As there's more traffic, it needs more money for preservation. That line keeps going up. The revenue source also keeps going up, which drives everybody nuts. But those two lines cross. And when they cross, you do not have money for new capacity, and you cannot preserve the existing system. Those lines crossed 10 years ago. 10 years ago, about 2001, 2002. Those lines crossed, and the legislature saw it. I've been coming to the legislature on this issue for 16 years. I worked 5 sessions before I was ever in the Senate with TxDOT. And as we talk about that, those lines cross, and so the members of finance and stuff saw that 10 years ago and began doing tools, toll roads, the mobility fund Chairman Phillips talked about, and then as those tools started kind of maxing out, other creative ideas of funding, but then they literally had to just start borrowing money to pay for expansions. And so we did Proposition 12, we did Proposition 14, we did the Metroplex hawked its toll road system to come up with another $3 billion just to add additional capacity that was non-tow. And so when you add all those debts that have been created for the last 10 years, $23 billion. That's not principal plus interest, that's just the principal. We've created $23 billion worth of debt, and now we've got to pay the piper. And so the new capacity that we see all over the state for the past 10 years in the current budget and the budget we're working on, the budget we're working on uses the very last of the borrowed money up. And so that's when the cliff hits. Not this cycle, but the next cycle.
Well, and I wonder if that might delay action this session. I've heard about next session. I've also heard the strange scenario of because one of the so-called diversions from the gas tax is money going to education, that perhaps, and I've heard a few people mention this to me now, a special session is probably going to happen on education next year, perhaps trying to make it about education and roads and do it all at once.
Well, you're the first person that's told me that. So, you know, I do think that it's fortunate that the cliff is a little bit further than we thought it would be. And a lot of that's just a matter of it takes a while to get these projects lined up and out the door. We've got some amazing interest rates now, so some of the projects have come in less in the cost of financing them. And construction, Texas has been where a lot of construction's been happening compared to the rest of the nation. I mean, we've done a fantastic job with the dollars we've got. He talks about the Metroplex. And I have to applaud the local communities and the local leadership. They've stepped up in many ways. I mean, this Tuesday, we had in the hearing, we had a county come in here and said, look, we've got this basically highway we built. We need authority to increase the speeds on that to a typical highway road because we don't have authority to do that. They stepped up and built some highways that traditionally may have been state highways because they knew they needed that added capacity, and that was in Central Texas. Those communities that have done that, that have used the tools that we created, they're far ahead of the rest of the areas that have chosen not to do that. And that's what's been exciting about what the last few sessions I've seen is to see the local communities come in and step and say, we want to take the tools that you've given us and try to find a way to do it. They don't no longer, because many years they just sit there and said, here, we need this much money, and they sit around and they walked away with this much money, and now they're saying, look, if we can take some of some of the money, take some of our portion, and then go do this and do this, we can actually get some projects done. And it's been amazing what's happened. In North Texas, and the Metroplex is a great example of taking $3 billion and turning it into $11 to $15 billion worth of roads. Toll's been a mix of that, private-public partnerships. We're going to see TRIZs or TRZs, Transportation Reinvestment Zones. We've got several bills this session. We're going to continue to do that. But I think it gets back to, unless we take care of diversions, these other issues are not going to be something that there's going to be an even consideration. We want to make sure that that diversion's done. And I explained that some of these diversions are confusing to talk about, but I do think that the DPS diversion, which is primarily the bulk of what we're talking about, as it's called the diversion. It's not a constitutional diversion. We need to address that. They also want to make sure that we're being smart with the money and that TxDOT's becoming more efficient. And so we have, over the last 10 years, TxDOT's has undergone an amazing evaluation. They've been audited, they've been sunsetted, they've been everything to go through that process. And I think there's a better level of confidence that the money that we're going to spend is going to be used more efficiently. And so those are things that I think have had to happen before we could start talking about these other issues.
I think some of the other members, if they see that we have funding in the current budget and the budget that we're working on, and there is for new capacity, they think, well, can we take care of it next session? And the answer is no, we can't. We need to take care of it this session. Because you cannot just spin on a dime and do a transportation project. The environmental process, you have to first establish which projects are we going to build. And that takes a lot of consensus. And then you have to do your environmental, which takes several years. We're getting faster and faster, and we've got a bill out there that will speed it up some more. And then you've got to do the engineering, and then you can issue the purchase order. So it takes a number of years. And a lot of people, it takes a while for them to understand that. And so TxDOT needs to be working now on the projects that we need 5 and 6 years from now. But if they cannot see that they have the funding, they're fiscally restrained from bringing those new projects and doing the environmentals and beginning the right-of-ways and the engineering, stuff like that, to get those things ready. They can't really do that because they can't see where the money's coming from.
Well, and you mentioned all the toll road work happening in the Metroplex. It seems like a lot of the discussion has been about rainy day fund money, and part of that would go towards more toll roads, probably, I'd imagine.
Well, I guess the question of the rainy day fund, if we were able to access the rainy day fund, which there's going to be a question, is the House going to be able to access the rainy day fund for water? Will they be able to for transportation? Because I've got several colleagues over there that say, why don't we access it for education? So we're going to have a real debate on the rainy day fund. We'll probably have some of that debate today on whether we're going to access rainy day for that. But what you're talking about is, I don't think you're going to see any suggestion that transportation dollars from the rainy day fund will be used for any one-time projects. Because it's simply not, that's just, that doesn't get us anywhere. I think what you'll see is it put in an infrastructure bank, modify the one we have, and it will be used to help those local communities help on projects to obtain, we call it a bank. When you take money from a bank, what happens? You have to pay it back. And so those projects will go towards that. And maybe what you're saying, it may not directly, but it's going to help the local communities and different projects either get cheaper financing, interim financing. There's different ways they could do that. It doesn't have to be a toll project. It could be a TRZ, which is a good example. It could be a non-toll project that, let's say, a county or city may be using some of their other bonding capacity to build that transportation project, and they need some interim financing to help them through the environmental phase or whatever. It should be something that can help multiple places, but it's going to be money that will become a revolving account and essentially stay there for continued use. So it's really not one-time money, because most of us don't think that it's very smart to use rainy day funding on what I say, not one time, but on ongoing basis, to fund ongoing needs. Right.
Yeah, I think there's a broad consensus in the legislature. You do not want to use it for ongoing expenses. One-time, very core functions of government might be considered. And as he was talking about, in the infrastructure bank, you put it in there, it becomes an evergreen fund. That the state and the citizens of the state get to benefit from ongoing in long periods of time for transportation improvements, and stays there with interest and grows. And so that would be a very helpful thing, just like the water thing. These are core functions of government: education, transportation, water. We all agree these are essential needs of it. We need to all pull our resources to make it happen.
Well, and one thing I'm just wondering, and then we'll put it up to questions, is given all the toll road work happening around the state, and not just in cities, but near the border and in East Texas, do you think that the state might be reaching kind of a maximum point, or like toll road fatigue?
You have some people out there who holler they don't like toll roads. My response to that is, then don't drive on them. You're not required to drive on a toll road. Anybody that gets on a toll road is getting traffic off of a congested road, and they're paying. You hear the second argument, well, that's double taxation. You use our tax money to help build a toll road, and then you charge us a toll to drive on the toll road. That's double taxation, and I don't think that's right. And that is a core philosophical question. Should you use state money to help build a toll road? And so the legislature decided 10 years ago, in 2001, actually it's 12 years ago now, to send it to the voters and let the voters answer that question. And the voters, 68% supported doing that because they want to get out of congestion, they want to go home. And for all the people out there hollering, no more toll roads, I've been watching a chart, and I've been watching it ever since we did the interoperability of tow tags in the state. As there's more toll roads, some people get tow tags. And that chart has been going up at an almost exponentially. And we have almost 6 million vehicles in the state of Texas that have tow tags. More than 1 out of 3 vehicles on the Texas roads have tow tags. Somebody likes riding on tow roads in this state.
And what about you, Representative? Do you feel that there's maybe a breaking point on toll roads, or?
Well, you know, I think certainly there are. When you don't have free alternatives, you know, those become issue. But I think people in North Texas, in the Metroplex and in the Harris County area, I think you've seen a favorable reception because the citizens know that they're not going to go anywhere unless we have that alternative. And so it's an alternative that's used. And if you get on North Texas Tollway, if I flew in today and got out and got on the road, it would be bumper to bumper. And so even that toll road, even is crowded. It's amazing the cut time. I heard this. They said going from I think they said Plano to Arlington now, the drive is 20% reduced because of the toll roads have been built. And I mean 20 minutes. So think about getting 20 minutes quicker. So if you're the ballpark in Arlington, you like that because if it's 20 minutes quicker to get from Plano all the way over to Arlington, that's pretty exciting for the folks over there. And it's just an example. It speeds things up. If you go on the toll roads during the day in the Metroplex, you see people that are doing work on our homes, whether they're, you know, guys doing plumbing or whatever, because they get more jobs in. You know, you see that they're taking advantage of it. So it's becoming part of the fabric up there. I think we would all say our preference would be no tolls. But at this point, because of the funding issues, if we have no tolls, that means we have no new construction. And I think as even a community here, we see an increase of the toll roads here. Let's not talk about the one that's further east on the town. It's not been quite the traffic count that was anticipated, but as that continues to get connected south and north, I think you're going to, and as the population grows, you're going to see that. You know, everybody can say, well, we don't have enough cars out there now, and we missed it by the numbers, but you know, think about it in 10 years as Austin continues to grow. Y'all aren't going to stop growing, are you? I don't see it. I mean, you're going to be so thankful that it's there, you know, and it's going to have a big impact on the future. And that's what we're worried about is 20 years from now, when the population doubles, are we going to just be sitting in traffic, or are we going to actually be having a productive economy?
I think it's also real important to understand that on toll roads, and a lot of people kind of forget this, the way the statutes currently are in Texas, the way we have the laws, that decision's made at a local level.
Right, that's right.
No one is going to go into an Austin or a San Antonio or a Houston or Dallas or something and tell them you have to have this toll road. The local community, through their metropolitan planning organization and their county officials and stuff, they make that decision locally. And they've got some tough choices. They only have a certain allocation for funding that's balanced through the state. And they have to look at that. They look at their congestion and their future growth needs. And then they locally decide we can build 3 projects as toll roads, or we can build this one as a tax road, but we have to wait 10 years to do that. Is that the best thing for the community? Because people are stuck in traffic and the congestion is getting worse. And so they have to wrestle with that as local people. And so it's a local decision. If they say, no, that cannot be a toll road, there's nobody in the state that can make them do it as a toll road. So it's a local decision. And people closest to their communities know best, better than we do. So that's the way we've set the whole thing up.
And I echo that, and I think that's the most important aspect for citizens to know. It's not Texas saying, I mean, it's not the state of Texas saying you shall have. It's y'all make that decision, and if your community chooses to take your allocated portion and multiply it, that's a decision that you have.